to change all the interfaces, even though they're good. Okay. Welcome to Armory 103. And somebody's got horrible feedback.
Yeah,
I can't tell who it is. If you have a mic and speakers, you may want to mute yourself unless you're actually speaking to prevent feedback. That's much better. Okay, this is Armory 103, the conflict rules. I was originally hoping to include actual conflict checking procedure in this class, but this class is already looking like it's going to take about an hour and a half, so that's going to be just too much to fit into this class. I will do the next class will cover the actual process of conflict checking. This one will just cover the rules. And with that, I am going to start the screen share so that we can get started. There we go. Okay. Yes, maybe. Okay, everyone sees the slide, I hope. Okay, so Armory 103, the conflict rules. This is aimed more at the folks watching this on YouTube rather than those live in the class. In order to understand the conflict rules, you must know charge group theory. It is an absolute prerequisite. So I encourage you to, before watching this video, to watch Armory 102, at least the part of it dealing with charge groups, and also to review the Appendix I of CINA, which is the charge group theory definitions. You cannot follow this class without understanding charge group theory. With that said, let's move on. So the idea of SCA conflict is based on the idea of cadency. In period, there would be changes in arms from one generation to the next, or from a main branch to a cadet branch. So, for example, let's say somebody had on his device a red lion on a white background. That's probably the device their son would inherit. But what if they had two sons? Well, the oldest son would inherit the same device. For the second son, they would make a small change. Maybe they'd add some stars around the line. Or maybe they change the line from red to blue. Or maybe they change the background from white to yellow. These are called cadency steps. It's the smallest changes that were used in period to differentiate between arms of close relatives. There's a book by Robert Gare called Heraldic Cadency. I believe it's out of print, but it's readily available. I think I got it for about 20 bucks used, and it talks in great detail about heraldic cadency. We're not going to talk about it much more than this, but just understand that that's where we're coming from. And these general principles are summarized in CINA section A5A. So what we want is any two pieces of armory to be more than one cadency step apart. Which means if I submit that red lion on a white background, you don't get to register a blue lion on a white background, because what that tells the world is that you're my brother. So we want more than that one step. The other thing we need to remember is that we conflict check the emblazons, not the blazons. We conflict check the picture, which means if there's more than one valid way to blazon something, we have to conflict check it every possible way. You may have heard the phrase that you cannot blazon your way out of conflict. So you can't try to reword it so that there's no conflict, because we base it on the picture. By comparison, if you have a style problem, then you can blazon your way out. If you can change the way it's blazoned, you can get around a style problem that way. Now, that being said, you don't have to conflict check against blazons that are either completely invalid or just highly improbable. So, for example, what we have here is, on the left, is Gould's 3 fesses ermine. Right? Red field, 3 fesses. On the right, we have Bari, Gould's, and ermine, a field equally divided between stripes of red and ermine, and unfortunately, it's not all that equal because I'm a lousy artist. These are considered equivalent. Okay, you can't say, well, you know, that I'm going to just reword it from 3 fesses to Bari. These two are so similar that we're just going to treat them as the same thing. However, this is Gould's a fess or, right? A yellow stripe on a red field. Hypothetically, we can say, well, this is really a yellow field with a red chief and a red base. You don't have to do it that way, because that's actually not a legal submission. It's actually against our rules to submit a chief and a base, especially if they're the same color and especially if the line of partition is the same, because of the potential for confusion. So we don't need to do that here because that's not a legal blaze. So some definitions. We have what's called a distinct change, a DC. This is a change that's equivalent to a single cadency step that we described. Okay, we require 2 of these to clear conflict. So if I submit that, if I have that device with a red line on a white field, you can submit a blue line, but maybe you can submit a blue line on a yellow field because now there's 2 steps. Now maybe you're my cousin, but that's good enough. What we're trying to avoid is the perception of close relatives. If you look at older precedents, things from before this current rules, SINA, you may see things called significant difference, clear difference, CD, or clear visual difference, CVD. These are all equivalent to the DC under the current rules. Don't get this confused with substantial difference, that's next. But clear difference and significant difference are both equivalent to a DC. And then we have substantial changes. It's a single change that's greater than a cadency step. It's the sort of thing that heralds in period would not have used between close relatives. So you only need 1 substantial change. And in older precedents, you may see that called substantial difference, or sometimes called an X2 difference from the rules for submission section X-.2. We talk about this as being strangers in blood. So for example, if I have that device, white device, a white shield with a red lion on it, and you want to submit a white shield with a red sword on it, those have nothing to do with each other. We're not brothers, we're not cousins, we just happen to like the same color scheme. Okay, so that's a substantial change. It makes it, we're not even close. There's also changes that are smaller than a single cadency step, and those don't contribute to conflict. To clearing conflict. We sometimes call them artistic variations. You may have heard the term maintained charges. So for example, if you have a lion holding a sword, that sword is not enough to count for a change, because we know in period lions were sometimes drawn holding a sword and sometimes they were not holding the sword. It's an artistic variation. Now if that sword is really big, that's a different story. Or if you have a lion on one device and a house cat on the other. Well, we have a rule that says cats are cats. So pretty much any of the felines are equivalent to one another. Changing from a house cat to a lion is not considered enough to give a change. Connell, are you with us? Yeah, okay. Your picture froze momentarily. Okay. So the first thing we always want to do is substantial changes. These are covered in section A5E, and this is a really simple way. This is the easiest way to clear conflict. If you've got a substantial change, you're done. You don't have to go any further. You don't need to count DCs. So we always want to change substantial changes first. Usually, pretty much, always, substantial changes apply to the primary charge group. Okay, the exception is field primary armory, which we're not going to cover in this class. So if you remember, the primary charge group is generally the largest and most central charge on the field, and most substantial changes deal with just that. So the first way to get a substantial change is to add or remove a primary charge group. So for example, that device there, which is per bend, azure, and ore, an anvil and an anchor counterchanged, and a chief embattled argent, is clear of that one. What have we done? We've gotten rid of the charge group. What's the primary charge group on a divided field? Shout it out. I'll ask questions. If I ask questions, please pop in, otherwise this gets very boring. The rule says if you have 2 charges on opposite sides of a divided field, they're the primary charge group. We took it away. That's a substantial change. We're done. These are clear. We don't need to do any more work. Next one. Each charge in the primary group must be changed. What's the charge in the one on the left? What's the primary charge in the one on the left?
Chevron.
Okay, what's the charge in the one on the right?
The Fess.
The Fess. They're two different charges. We're done. The colors, the cups, don't matter. We've changed the primary charge group. Just remember, it's got to be the primary charge group. Substantial change of type of the primary charge group. It has to be, every charge has to be changed, and it has to be a substantial change. So what's the primary charge group on the left?
Three trees.
Okay, what's the primary charge group on the right?
Two mullets in the tree.
Okay, have we changed every charge? No. Not clear under this rule. We got to do something else. How about now? Well, we've got trees and mullets, right? However, we've changed, if we look at each charge in the primary charge group, have we changed the type of each charge looked at by itself? We have. So this is clear. Okay. Substantial charge of number of charges in the primary charge group. For substantial change, we count 1, 2, 3, and many. Anything more than 3 is the same, including semi. So all three of these are clear of each other. 1 maskell, 2 maskells, 3 maskells. They're all clear of each other by substantial change of number. How about these two? Are they clear?
No.
No. 4 and lots is the same for this purpose. Okay? The next thing we have is change of arrangement of the primary charge group. But it's not any arrangement. It's ones on a specific list, and the list is in A5, E4. I've replicated it there. In Pale, in Fess, in Bend Sinister, in Saltier, in Cross. Now, the ones that are in the same line are considered equivalent. So in Saltier, 2 and 2, and crossed in Saltier, same thing. 2 and 1, 3, 2 and 1 are the same thing. So if you change from in Saltier to 2 and 2, that's not a substantial change. That's the same. Same thing with in oral and in annual. In oral and in annual are not the same, but they don't give us substantial change between them. So it's only between those specific arrangements. There is no substantial change if either of the devices has an arrangement that's not on that list. We'll see that in a second. And you also don't get a change in arrangement for what's called a forced change. We'll see that in a second. So, what's the arrangement of the lines in the first shield?
In Fess.
In Fess. How about in the second one? Anybody? Jump in.
Those are in Pale.
Okay, and the third one?
In Bend.
In Bend, good. Are in Pale, in Fess, in Bend on this list? Yeah, those three are clear of each other. Now, what's the first one? Those are fions, by the way, if you don't recognize them. It's a stylized Erica. What's the arrangement on the first one?
2 and 1.
Okay, and how about the second one?
In Pale.
Okay, so 2 and 1 and in Pale are on our list, right? In Pale's up top, 2 and 1 is second from the bottom. So they're clear from each other. How about the rightmost one? What's the arrangement there? That's 1 and 2. Okay? That's what first one is 2 and 1, this one's 1 and 2. But guess what? 1 and 2 is not on our list. And the reason that it's not on our list is that it's an arrangement that's pretty much not used in period heraldry. So that one is not clear of either of those by substantial change. There's no, the left one versus the right one doesn't get a substantial change. The middle one versus the right one doesn't get a change because 1 and 2 is not on our magic list. Substantial change of arrangement. Okay. What's the arrangement of the ravens on the left?
In Fess.
How about on the right?
They're in Bend.
Okay. So here's the question. We want to know whether there's a substantial change here. That shield on the right, Could we have put those ravens in Fess?
Not really.
Why not?
Because you wouldn't be able to see the Argent birds on the Argent parts of the field.
Yeah, exactly. The field is neutral, so you can put a metal charge on the neutral field, but it can't be the same tincture. You can't have a white charge partly on the white field. So the birds are forced to their positions, which means this is what's called a forced move, and it's not clear. You do not get a change, a substantial change. This is a tough one sometimes because you really need to look at it, and especially if you don't have a picture in front of you, visualizing it can be difficult. But basically, if the field forces you out of the arrangement, you don't get a substantial change. Okay, substantial change of posture or orientation of the primary charge group. So first of all, like with change of type, has to apply to all the charges, all of them. You also have to have what's called comparable postures and orientations, and we'll see what that means in a second. And again, it's only the listed postures and orientations that get the benefit. So charges are divided like this: animate and inanimate. There's never a comparable posture or orientation between an animate and inanimate charge. So if you have a lion on one shield and a spear on the other, well, you know, aside from type changes, you can't get a SC for posture orientation from, because a spear can't be compared to a lion. You know, a spear can't be rampant or dormant or whatever. So within animate charges, we break it up between quadrupeds, birds, fish, insects, and other. So quadrupeds are comparable with each other, birds are, fish are, insects are, other, kind of case by case. If they're in different categories, they don't have comparable posture. Inanimate charges are divided into compact, which really don't have an orientation at all. Think a mullet. Or long, you know, the aforementioned spear. And these do have orientations. And again, there's no comparable orientations between compact and long. I'm not going to reproduce all of the different orientations on the list. You know, if you go look at A5, E5 and refer to it often. But here's the list for quadrupeds. We have the first category is rampant, sagriant, salient, sejant erect, sejant, and the conturny versions of these, the turned around. The thing they have in common is they all basically have an upright body. Okay, all of these are basically up and down. So within those categories, there's no substantial change. But between that category and the next one, there is. The second category is courant, passant, statant, couchant, dormant, and again the conturny versions. Basically anything with a horizontal body. And then you have affronti, sejant affronti, and sejant erect affronti, which is any of the ones where the animal is turned completely to face the viewer. And notice that the flipping the charge does not give you an SC. So going from rampant to dexter to rampant to sinister, that's not a substantial change. So, looking at quadrupeds, we have some lions. What's the first lion? What's the posture?
Passant.
Passant. How about the middle one?
Rampant.
And the third one?
Affronti.
Sejant affronti.
That's affronti.
Sitting. So these all three are clear by complete change of posture. These are the three different categories that we have here for quadrupeds. They're clear of each other. How about these two? What's the postures?
Passant and sejant?
Passant and couchant.
Couchant.
Couchant. Are they in the same category, in different categories over here?
Nope.
No, they're both basically horizontal body, right? So no, there's no substantial change here. So, long inanimate charges. You get SCs between palewise and palewise inverted, fesswise and inverted, bendwise and inverted, and bendwise sinister and inverted. So basically changing the major axis of the charge. Again, flipping it around end for end doesn't get you a DC. So, what's the first one?
We've lost the video.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Everybody?
I can still see it.
Connell, do you have me?
No, I have you, but you were just a picture of you with speaker for going around
Okay,
for a while.
I think that's probably a bandwidth bug. All right. So, what's the first shield? Somebody give me the full blazon for the first shield.
Or 2 trumpets per pour.
Yeah. Where are these trumpets and how are they oriented?
Isn't that the default for trumpets? Is bells
Well,
to chief?
let's forget default. We want to get
Fair
the
enough. Bells to chief.
Okay, and how are they arranged?
In fess.
Right. So these are or two straight trumpets in fess, pale-wise, if we want to be explicit, bells to chief, per pour. How about the second one?
Or 2 trumpets. In fess, 2 trumpets, bells to dexter, or pale-wise.
Fess-wise.
Fess-wise, bells to dexter per pour.
Yeah. Okay, so we went from pale-wise to fess-wise, right? That's a change. Now, how about the one on the right? Is that clear of the first one?
Nope.
No. We've just flipped it. Now, is the middle one clear of the right one?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's for the same reason, right? Fess-wise versus pale-wise. We're looking at the major axis. Now, please don't draw 2 straight trumpets fess-wise and fess. It looks ugly as sin. But, okay. Compact charges do not. They may have an orientation in the artistic sense. They don't have an orientation for the purpose of this. So flipping that mullet over, not an SC. Okay. That's a compact charge. It can't have a substantial change for orientation. Period. The two are just, you know, if you lean slightly to the right, they become identical. Okay? So, has to be a complete change of posture orientation. Every charge has to have a change. So let's take a look at this. What are the 2 top charges that we have here? Is there a complete change of posture between the top 2 charges?
Yes.
Yeah. We went from a lion passant to a lion rampant. We're good so far. How about on the bottom? Can we compare a ship to a dragon?
No, you can't compare them.
You cannot. So do we have a change of posture of every charge? No, we can't.
But you have
there's
a
no way
complete
to do it.
You've got a complete change of the charges themselves. Why isn't it?
No. No, you've got lions up top.
Well, that's true.
Right? A lion's a lion. Now, this may still be clear, right? Because we haven't gotten to the DCs. There actually is 2 DCs here, and the devices are clear, but there's not a substantial change. I said not clear. Really, what I should have said is that there's no substantial change. Okay, we'll get to how to clear this later on. Okay, but every charge has to have the comparable orientation and be clear. How about this one? Are these clear? And why? Well, I know I'm giving away that they're clear. But
We have comparable orientations in both cases for both the lions and the sword.
Yeah, and both have a substantial change, right?
And both
we
have
went from fess-wise to pale-wise, and we went from rampant to passant. So both are. Okay, so again, what I really want to emphasize, because looking at people doing commentary, I see this not done correctly all the time. You always, always, always want to look for the substantial changes first. I frequently see people arguing over, well, do we really have a second DC when there's a substantial change? Okay, if you have a substantial change, unless you're doing it for teaching purposes, don't bother with the DCs. Substantial change, clear, move on. Okay? Sometimes if you look at some of my commentary, I'll say, we have a substantial change, but we also have 3 other distinct changes. It's not because I care about them, it's because I'm trying to teach somebody. But always look for them first. And there's a lot of people say, oh, I forgot, I was counting DCs and I forgot about substantial changes. I'd rather you did it the other way around. Forget about DCs. Worry about the substantial changes. Okay? There's only 4 of them that you really run into. Type, number, arrangement, posture. You got to memorize that list. You don't have to memorize the list of postures. You just have to remember, oh, posture, primary charge, change of posture, let me go look at the list. and the fifth one is adding or removing a primary charge group, but that basically takes you from a regular armory into field primary, so it's a pretty obvious change. Okay, that's not one that that really you worry about too much. It's usually quite obvious. But type, number, arrangement, posture. Memorize those four. If you don't remember anything else from the class, remember that list. That being said, let's move on to distinct changes. So if there are no substantial changes, we got to look at distinct changes. We need two of these to clear. Many of them are similar to the substantial changes. Usually they require less difference. With substantial changes, we always required everything to change. With DCs, we usually only require half of the group to change. We can also get DCs for the field. We can't get substantial changes for the field, again, except in field primary armory, which we're not dealing with. And the other thing is changes in tincture can generate DC. We don't get substantial changes for tincture, again, except in field primary. So let's look at it. Changes to the field. So the thing about changes to the field is there's lots of ways to get a DC for a change to the field, but you can only ever get one DC. So even if I change 10 different things about the field, you only get one DC towards the two that you need. So, change of tincture. If you change the tincture of at least half of the field, that's a DC. If you swap or rotate the tinctures of a field that's divided into 2, 3, or 4 parts, that's a DC. But if it's divided into more than 4 parts, you don't. Okay, and we'll see that in a minute. And if you have furs, ermine, counter-ermine, peon, that sort of thing, potency, they're considered separate tinctures from their underlying tinctures. So ermine is not argent, it's ermine. So, what have we got here? We've got, hang on a second, I've got some kind of message, so let me see if it's, no. Hi, Ryan. Okay. So, what's the field tincture on the first one?
Or.
And the second one?
Ermine.
And the third one?
Argent.
Are they all three? Has at least half the field changed in all three?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a distinct change between each one. Okay, how about here? We're just looking at the field. Is there a first of all, what's this field division?
Per Paul.
Okay, so the first two, do we have a DC? It's the same 3 colors, right?
Yes, because we have tinctures in a field divided into 3 parts.
Yeah, we've rotated it, right?
Yeah.
No section is the same.
Yep.
We've rotated it, and it's 3 parts, so that's okay. How about the third one? Same thing, right? We still have red in common, but it's not in the same section. And sorry, let me start over. We've changed more than half of the field against either one, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've changed the blue and yellow together make up more than half of the field. So whether the red is in the same spot as in the first one or in the different spot as in the middle one doesn't matter. We have a DC. Now, how about here? We've changed. This is Checky. We went from Checky, Argent, and Azure to Checky, Azure, and Argent. Is there a DC? No. How many parts is the field divided into?
Many.
Many, right? More than 4. So there's no DC for swapping the tinctures. And again, if you think about it, this makes sense. Do you really want to, if you're across the field from this guy, do you really want to figure out which color's in the top left corner? Or is it just Checky? Okay. So the next thing that we can get, we're still on the field. The next way to get a DC is if you change the direction of the partition line. And any of those things on the list there are different. You have to include at least half of the lines of division. Okay, and all of these also include the multiple line versions, like per pale as well as paley, per bend as well as bari. So if you make any of these changes, you get a DC. You also get a DC if you change the... I'm not going to show you an example of this. This is pretty clear. If you change from per bend to per fess, it's a DC. Any of those, you should be able to hopefully visualize this. I did not want to draw 27 examples. You also get a DC if you change the style of the partition line. So you could have a plain line, you could have a complex line. Now, not all complex lines are clear of each other. Some are clear, some are not. Appendix M of SINA spells out which conflict and which don't. And then the Appendix M talks about several families. There's the straight line variants. Plain, ployé, enarched, kind of a curved, arrondi for certain ones, again curved. Those are all the same family. There's no DC between them. Square includes embattled, dovetailed, breteste, embattled, counter-embattled, ragulae, and denticulata. Wavy, long, jagged, and other. Now, jagged and other are special. With all the other ones, you need to change families to get a DC. Jagged, each one of those actually counts separate. Same thing with other, because they're just weird. So let's take a look at an example. Somebody blaze on the left one.
Perpale, gules, and or an annulet azure.
Good. How about the next one?
Perpale, embattled, gules.
Okay, you can stop there. I know you know this. Okay, so plain versus embattled, that's a DC. Okay, what's the division line on the third one?
Dovetailed.
Dovetailed. It's got a DC against the plain, right? Does it have a DC against the embattled?
No.
Let's go back and look. Embattled and dovetailed are both considered square. Right? So no DC. And again, it makes sense. How different are they? You've got a guy coming at you on horseback at 40 miles an hour. Can you tell if those corners are 90 degrees or not? It's kind of squarish. Changing the number of pieces. You only get a DC between 1, 2, 3, 4, and many. Okay? So there's a DC between 3 and 5. There's not a DC between 5 and 6. There's an exception for a field division called Party of 6. If you really are interested, go look at the section. I'm not going to go into Party of 6. I'm not sure I've ever seen Party of 6 in an essay submission. I'm sure someone's done it, but usually you see it in mundane heraldry with Marshall. So, how many pieces is the first field divided into?
2.
2. How about the right one?
2, 3, 4, 5.
Remember, after 4, you can stop counting. It's anything over 4 is many. So that's a DC. Right? 2 versus many. How about here? How many pieces on the left? 2. How about on the right?
2.
No, many.
Many. Okay.
Many. Yeah. Only half of it is many, but it's so it's many plus 1. It's still many. How about here? How many pieces divisions on the left? And somebody blaze on that. No? That field division is called gyrony. You have gyrony of 6, which is 6 pieces. You have gyrony of 8, which is 8 pieces. Do we have a DC there? No, they both count as many. Okay. Again, we don't want you sitting there as your enemy's riding at you with a lance, counting pieces of his shield. The last one that you need to know about the field is fieldless armory. As you guys probably know, badges can be registered as fieldless, meaning that there's no field defined for them, just charges. All fieldless armory automatically gets a DC for the field against every other piece of armory, including other fieldless badges. But remember, you only get 1 for the field. So you see something fieldless, you got 1 DC for the field. The second DC has to come from somewhere else. We also have a special category called Tinctureless Armory. We don't register Tinctureless Armory anymore, except for seals for Principal Heralds, which means there's one per kingdom of those. So until we get more kingdom, we're not going to see more of them. But in the past, we used to register them, so they're still out there. And Tinctureless is considered a variant of Fieldless, and the way we treat them is you get that one free DC for the field, but you get no other DCs related to Tincture of anything. Okay? And again, remember, there's at most one DC for the field. We just looked at like B, C, D, E, F, G, like 5 ways to get a DC for the field, but you only get one. So, adding or removing a charge group gets you a DC. Now we know that adding or removing a primary charge group gets you a substantial change, but adding a secondary, tertiary, or overall charge group, or removing it, gets you a DC. So, what's the primary charge group?
The lion.
In both, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the secondary charge group?
The mullet.
Good. We added a primary charge group, we've got a DC. How about here? What's the primary charge group?
Still the lion.
What's the secondary charge group?
The chief.
The chief, yeah. And don't forget, a chief is a peripheral ordinary. It has to be a secondary charge group. Can't be anything else. How about here? Do we have a DC for adding or removing a charge group? Nah. Do we have a secondary charge group in the first one?
Yes.
The star. Do we have a DC in a secondary in the second one? Yes, the chief. We have not added or removed a charge group. How about here? Do we have a DC for adding or removing a charge group? No.
No.
How many secondary charge groups do you have in the first shield?
One.
One. Right? We're not talking about adding or removing charges. We're talking about charge groups. All 3 of those stars are in the same charge group. On the right, one charge group. It's a smaller charge group, but it's still a charge group. How about here? Oh, and my answer here is incorrect, so there's your hint. So don't read the answer at the bottom. How many charge groups do we have on the left?
2.
2, right? We have the chief and we have the star. A peripheral ordinary is not in the same charge group as anything else. How many secondary groups do we have on the right? Just one. We've removed a secondary charge group. Okay? How about here? What have we added?
An overall charge.
An overall charge group. Yeah, so that gets us a DC. How many DCs do we have here? The answer is on the screen, but So why are there 2 DCs? Let's count chargers. Do we have on the left shield? Do we have a primary charge group? Yes. Yes. What's the primary charge group?
It's still the lion.
Still the lion. Do we have a secondary charge group?
On the left you have.
On the left, the one on the left. Do we have a secondary charge group?
Yes, you do. It's a chief.
The chief. Do we have any tertiary charge groups?
Nope.
Do we have any overall charge groups?
Nope.
Okay, let's look on the way on the right. Do we have a primary charge group?
Yeah.
Do we have a secondary charge group? Do we have a secondary?
No.
No. So what have we done? We've removed the secondary charge group. That's a DC. Do we have a tertiary charge group?
Still no.
Still no. Do we have an overall charge group? Yeah, we've added an overall charge group. 2 different DCs. One for removing secondary, one for adding an overall. That's not the same thing as what we had back here, right? Here, we have one secondary group in both cases. We've changed the type of it, and we'll talk about type. But these are both secondaries. Here, that's a secondary, and that's an overall. Different kind of charge group. We get 2 DCs. Everybody clear on this one? Because this one trips up people sometimes. Yes? Okay. When we're talking about tertiary charge groups, they're comparable if they're on the same type of underlying charge, the primary, the secondary, the overall. If they're not, then we can't get a DC for adding or removing it. It has to be adding or removing a comparable one. So, we have a DC here. Why?
Because you've added the mullets to the chief.
Yeah, the mullets are a tertiary charge group. We added them to the chief. That's fine. That's a DC. How about here? What's the DC for?
You've added mullets to this cross.
To the primary charge group, right?
The primary charge.
So here, we actually have two DCs. Why is that? Right? We said it has to be comparable, right? So we removed a tertiary charge group from a secondary. That's one DC. We've added a charge group to a primary. That's a different DC because these two are not comparable. Make sense? Yes? Okay. So, next way to get a DC. Change of tincture within a charge group. You get a DC if you change half or more of the charge group. And when we say half, it could be by area or it could be by number. We'll see both examples. Pretty much the same rules as the field. Changing the tincture, changing the division line, changing the from a simple to a complex line. Basically the same exact rules as for the field, only for a charge group. And much like for the field, you can only get one DC for a change of tincture within a single charge group. Now you can have multiple DCs for changing tinctures of different charge groups, but at most one within a group. So, somebody blaze on the first one.
Profess, ghouls, and argent, and an amulet counterchanged.
Okay. How about the second one?
Profess, ghouls, and argent, an amulet counterchanged argent and sable.
Good. That's the correct blazon. You can also blazon it as profess, ghouls, and argent, and amulet, profess, argent, and sable.
Mm-hmm.
Both are valid blazons, and remember, we've got to check every valid blazon, but the counterchanged argent and sable is the better one, in my opinion. So, have we changed half of the amulet? Half or more? Yeah.
Yes.
Red on the left, black on the right. We get a DC. How about here? What have we done to these mullets?
You've completely changed the color of each of the.
Okay,
the two
so
groups.
we've changed the colors. What else have we done to them?
You've also changed the line of the division.
Okay, so how many DCs does that get me?
If I recall that last bit from the 3 slides ago, it's only one.
Exactly, because both changing the line of partition and changing the actual tincture counts as part of that whole changing the tincture. They're the same charge group. You can only get one DC. Somebody want to blazon these?
Got it. Ghouls, a fess, argent, 3 mullets of 8 points, 2 and 1, but it's 3 mullets per pail. Oh, but you do the per pail at the end, don't you? You do the arrangement and then the.
Well, the 2 and 1 is the default, so you can skip it if
so
you
fair
want.
enough.
But yes.
So fair enough. 3 mullets per pail, azure and ore.
Yeah.
And
the other ones are profess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. The only thing you missed is the word between. Between.
Between.
But, that's okay. You probably would have caught it if you were writing it down. How many DCs do we have here? Yeah, well, it's 2. It says so on the bottom. Why is it 2?
Because of the way we were talking about beforehand, but also at the same time frame, the field division also having a secondary color.
Well, that's not a field division. What's that in the middle there?
That's that's a fess.
That's a fess, right? A fess is a charge, not a division. So is the fess in the same charge group as the stars?
Nope.
No, quite. The fess is the primary charge group, right? Central ordinary, big important primary charge. Different charge groups, we can get a DC for tincture for each one of them. All right? Make sense? Why there's two here? Okay.
What was the previous slide? Okay, so how many only one DC, because, okay, right, because we're only changing one of the charge groups.
Yeah, whereas here we've changed two charge groups. So maximum 1 DC for tincture per charge group, not total, per charge group. Okay, next one is change of type within a charge group. So, much like change of type in the back in the SC section, however, you only need to change half or more. You don't have to change all of them. You only get 1 DC for change of type in any one charge group. Same to what we were talking about with tincture. And the change doesn't have to be as important. So substantial change, it has to be complete change. The two charges have to have almost nothing to do with each other. With the distinct changes, it can be a lesser change. So, here's an example. Somebody blazon these.
Or a wine passant ghouls.
Azure. Okay, how about the one on the right? What critter is that? Anybody know?
That is a tiger.
You're required to know that one by law.
That is a tiger. It's a complete different change because it's not a kitty cat.
Well, yeah. So a tiger is not a cat, so it's not the same. But it's also not so different that it gets a substantial change, and that's just by precedent. Okay? So there is a distinct change between a lion and a tiger, but not a substantial change.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, when I was preparing this, I went out looking for, I said, okay, what charges get a DC but not an SC? There's not a lot. This is one of them. Okay? And they're both passant. Very differently drawn passants, but both passant. And Connell, you're from the East. You should recognize a blue tiger. Okay. How many DCs do we have here?
Two.
Yeah. What's the type DC? What have we done to the type?
We've changed from a roundel to a mullet. Well, actually, to
a mullet. That's fine. And we changed the tincture, right? But wait, there's white still. Is that okay?
But it's a change to 50% of the
50%. So. Exactly right. Now, why isn't this mullets and roundels are as different as you can get? Why isn't this a substantial change?
Because they're not the primary charge.
Because they're not the primary charge. Absolutely right. Okay. What have we got here? We've changed the roundels to tigers, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've changed the sun to a mullet. So why do we only get 1 DC?
Because it's only the one charge group that's changed.
Yeah, only 1 DC for type in a single charge group, and all 3 of those charges are in the same charge group, right? Okay. So, if you change the edge of an ordinary or a simple geometric shape, plain line versus complex line, that's considered a change in type, and it gives a DC but not an SC. So this is a DC between a chief embattled and a chief wavy. Now the slide I didn't put in that I meant to, I just realized, but it's an important one. Suppose you have a chief embattled and you have a bordure wavy. How many DCs is that?
You get 1 for the type and 1 for the treatment?
No, that's the mistake.
All right.
Changing the line of the line is part of type.
Got it.
Okay, you're not changing from a chief to a bordure and from embattled to wavy. You're changing from a chief embattled to a bordure wavy. That's just one change of type. Plus, remember, you can only get one DC for type to begin with.
Okay.
That's one I see quite often. People think of the line as kind of its separate thing. It's not. It's part of type. So you don't get an extra one there. I should have had a slide on that, but okay. Change of number works just like the substantial change, but any charge group, not just the primary, and we get more numbers. Instead of 1, 2, 3 many, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 many. Okay, heralds cannot count above 5. Anything above 5 is a semi. Okay. Again, I'm not going to do an example for this. It's exactly like the substantial change. You just have more numbers. So if you have, 4 versus 5, that's not a substantial change, but it's a distinct change.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Change of arrangement. Again, this works just like the substantial change, but there's more arrangements that are allowed. Remember we had that list of magic arrangements for substantial change? Pretty much any change in arrangements gets you a DC. Only the magic ones get you a substantial change. Applies to any charge group. Now, you still have to have comparable... I'm sorry, no, that's posture later. You also can get a DC for location on the field. So if you, we'll see that in a moment. But you don't get location DCs for Fieldless Armory. And you also don't get DCs for a change of arrangement that's forced either by the field, by other charges, or by the number of charges. So if you go from, one thing to 3 things, well, of course you have a different arrangement, right? You can't arrange one item 2 and 1. Make sense? All right. So this is that change of position. Somebody blaze on the left one.
Per pale ghouls or a ship argent.
Yeah. Can the ship be there in the middle, sitting halfway on the oar? Sure,
Yes,
it's a neutral field.
Considered a neutral field.
Yeah. Now blaze on the one on the right.
Profess ghouls and or in chief a ship argent.
Yeah. So have we changed the position of the charge? Yeah, that's a DC. How about here? Why don't we get the DC here?
Because it's forced.
It's forced. We had to move it, right? Could we leave that ship in the middle of the field? No. Argent on argent again. Okay, no DC. So it can be forced by the field. It can be forced by other charges, by numbers. If you don't have a choice but to change arrangement, you don't get a DC. You do get it when you're dealing with tertiaries. You do get a DC if you move the charge from one tertiary to a different tertiary. So that's a DC. Okay. It's not a. You don't get to say, oh, I removed one charge group and placed another charge group, because there's only one tertiary charge group in each case, right? But it's moved, and that move is not forced, so that's a DC. Change of posture or orientation. Again, works just like the substantial change, but you have a lot more postures that are permitted, and they're listed in Appendix L. Okay. Applies to any charge group, and things like adorst and respectant can apply to any animate charges, even if they're not comparable. And that's important. So, are lions comparable to ravens?
No.
No. Can you have a rampant raven? No. Can you have a close lion? No. But we still get a DC here because we went from respectant or combatant to adorst. Okay? If it was just the one, we wouldn't get a change. We also get a posture orientation change for turning them around, for facing the other way. So if this was just a lion rampant and a raven close, that would not be a DC for posture, because they're not comparable. But combatant versus a Dorst is, because you're changing the facing of both of them.
So there's 2 DCs here.
There's 2 DCs here, yeah. One for type of the charges and one for the arrangement. So these devices are clear. Does that make sense? Okay. Special rule. Half of a charge group doesn't mean half. Usually it means half. So if you have 2 charges, half of that is 1. If you have 4 charges, half of it is 2. That's pretty easy. But there's, in cases when you have 3 charges, sometimes changing only one of them counts as changing half for the purposes of it getting a DC. And these are specific situations. If you have a field arranged 2 and 1, then the bottom charge is considered half. So somebody blazon this. Connell, you haven't done one in a while. Blazon it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got me at the bad one on this one. Argent. It's the placement that gets me.
Well, what's the arrangement of the charge? So let's break this down. What's the primary charge group?
The bear.
No.
No, it's the bear and the crosses.
All 3 of them. They're pretty similar weight. So there's actually no placement issue. This is 2 and 1, standard arrangement.
Sorry, you guys were breaking up. Apparently, my audio is a little on the back. Can you repeat that?
So that's fine. This is actually all one charge group. The bear and the plus signs are pretty much the same visual weight. So what arrangement is that? If it's all 3 are in the same charge group, I'll give you a hint. It's in the text above because that's what we're discussing.
Okay, the 2 and 1.
Yeah, so that's the default arrangement, right? So you don't need to worry about arrangement. So what are the charges? How do we blazon the plus signs? Somebody jump in and help, Connell.
Yeah, please.
2 crosses cooped vert.
Yeah, that's a cross cooped. A regular cross goes all the way from top to bottom. You know, from top to bottom.
It would cover the entire shield.
Yeah. So if you cut it off, then it's cooped. Okay. So if we were going to do stuff to compare this to another field, the bottom of charge in a 2 and 1 arrangement counts as half of the charges. So if we change something about the bear, that counts as changing half the charge group. If we change one of the crosses, it does not. Okay? Special rule for certain groups of 3. Another one is, and yes, Ryan, you're correct. Another one is if you have 3 charges on a central ordinary or on a chief, then the middle one counts as half. So in this case, that would be the fleur-de-lis. If we did something to the fleur-de-lis, it would count as half of that tertiary charge group. Now somebody blazon this.
So that's pain on a chief or a you say 2 roundels and a fleur-de-lis vert?
Yeah, I would say.
Sorry, azure.
Yeah, I would say a fleur-de-lis between 2 roundels, or that's the way I would do it. But changing something about that fleur-de-lis would count as changing half of that charge group. The other one, the next special half rule is if you have charges on a primary or a secondary group that split either around a line of division or around a central ordinary, then each of those parts counts as half. So the 3 well, let's start with this. So somebody blazon this. Or before we blazon it, what's the primary charge group?
The roses and the lozenge.
The roses and the lozenge. Now somebody blazon it.
per chevron argent and gules, 3 roses proper, and a lozenge argent.
Very good. So, if we change something to the lozenges, to the roses, well, that's clearly more than half, right? That's 3 out of 4. But if we do something to the lozenge, that still counts as half. Each of those counts as half of the charge group because they're split across a field division. Okay? I don't know what happened. So, here's the other part of it. You can only get 1 DC if you change a smaller section that is considered half under the special rule. Somebody blaze on the first one.
Ghouls, 3 lions, or.
Right. Rampant is the default, 2 and 1 is the default. Somebody blaze on the right one.
Ghouls, 2 lions, or, and a tiger passant contourni argent.
Yeah, that's actually a wolf. But
Oh, is it a wolf? Yeah, you're right.
it's hard to see for you. So, what have we done to that bottom charge? What have we changed?
Type, posture, and tincture.
Type, posture, and tincture. In fact, we've done almost 2 things of posture, right? We've turned it around and we've changed it, which doesn't get you 2 DCs. But so how many DCs do we have? Just the 1. Because it's not really half. We're giving you credit for half, but we're only going to give you so much credit. These 2 devices conflict. Now here's a bonus question to see who was paying attention in Armory 102. That device on the right, is it legal? Can I submit that one with a wolf?
It violates unity of posture.
Unity of posture, yeah. You have a rampant lion and you have a passant contourni wolf. Are they both quadrupeds? Yeah, so that they have comparable posture, right? So that's not actually a legal device. Doesn't mean you won't find one registered. Remember that when people have been registering stuff since like the 60s or 70s, some of the stuff from back then is really weird and would not get registered by today's standards. So just because it's not legal doesn't mean you don't need to know how to conflict check it. Unity of posture is a new rule in SINA. Before 2012, there was no such rule. All right, we're almost done. I'm actually amazed that this only took an hour. I was expecting about an hour and a half. I will finish with the same final thoughts I always do. Don't forget that registerable and authentic are not the same thing. A submission has to be registerable. It doesn't have to be authentic. We like to encourage people to be authentic. We should encourage nice period heraldry. We can't force people, and we shouldn't force people. If you have someone who comes up with a device or you help them come up with a device and you know it's registerable, but it's really bad Armory, you still got to process it, okay? At the end of the day, it's not our devices, it's our clients' devices. This is a customer service job. When you're doing consulting, it's a customer service job. We want to help registrations happen. When you're consulting, help them make devices they like. When you're commenting, look for reasons to allow registration, not to prohibit it. In practice, you have to do both. Sometimes you just got to say, hey, that's a conflict, or hey, that's illegal. But if you look at least the way I try to comment, rather than saying, that's illegal, return it, I usually try to say something like, that's not registerable, but if you make this one little change, it'll be okay. Look for ways to help the submitter. We want a reputation for being helpful. Heralds already have a reputation as being a bunch of people that always say no. We're really trying to fight that. If you're bad at customer service, that doesn't mean you can't be a herald. It just means maybe you shouldn't be doing consulting. There's lots of non-consulting jobs in heraldry, research, submissions processing. We have some pure research heralds, and God bless them. We need them. We couldn't do our job without them. But unless you're good at you don't have to be good at customer service. Unless you're willing to try to be good at customer service, maybe you shouldn't be talking to clients directly. Once again, I'm the East Kingdom Heraldic Education Deputy, Elmet Herald. There's my contact info. This handout will be up on the web page there in a few minutes. Ryan wants an invite. Ryan is Brigantia Principal Herald, so we will invite him to say a few words when we're ready to finish up. But before that, questions? Anything we've covered? Anything that you're curious about that we haven't covered? Now's the time for Q&A.
Only question that I've got right at the moment is I'm in the process of getting the Giggleswick Herald up to speed. You mind if I've got a way of being able to rip these off of YouTube? Is it okay if I burn these CD to give to him so he can...
By all means, I don't think I've ever posted an explicit copyright notice. I probably should. As far as I'm concerned, these are released into the public domain. Do with them what you will. And the more people in the SCA see them, the happier I will be. I will, if I remember, post an explicit public domain release somewhere. Most of these, all of the artwork is mine, so I can release even that. Some of it, actually, that's not true. So a lot of the artwork is belongs to Gunvor, who's Oral Herald, so obviously I can't release her rights, but she has made a blanket statement that her clip art can be used for any SCA purposes without any kind of attribution. So perhaps we'll do that. I'll do the same thing, so it's not to impinge on her. I'll just say that it's Creative Commons, but no attribution is required if you're doing this within for any kind of SCA purposes. And really, if you're trying to do it for some other purposes other than the SCA, then A, I've got to wonder why, and B, I don't have a problem with that either. So, with that note, let me bring in Ryan because he wants to say hi.
Always think better to ask before burning.
By all means, no, I appreciate you asking, and I've got no problem with this being distributed as wide. And Istvan, no, I said crows can't be rampant, just like lions can't be combatant. There's a few senior heralds watching all this.
Oh dear.
At least Istvan and Ryan are. And there's Ryan. Hi, Ryan. You're live. Your mic is muted. Your microphone is muted.
It always does that on me. Hi, guys. I'm Ryan. I'm Brigantia Principal Herald of the East. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out, spending your evening with our Elmet Herald and learning. He's one of the better heralds in this sort of realm that I know. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that look. Dude, you spent 40 hours at Herald's Point. You're a senior herald. Get over it.
Gabriel said so I probably can't argue any further.
No, you can't. You can't. If Gabriel says you're a senior herald, you're a senior herald. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out and spending their evenings learning how to be a better herald. We take great pride in our heralds in the East, and it's one of the great things that I get to experience being in this job, is that I get to lead these people, and so you guys are some of the most fantastic people that I know in the SCA, and thank you for coming out and volunteering.
Hi, Kaylee.
She's in the other room doing a scroll. She must have heard me talking. But oh shoot, what did I do?
And that's Kaylee, who is Tiger Clerk of the Signet.
Yep, she does the scrolls. I read them. Yes, dear.
Hi.
And you've scared Connell away.
Connell knows me. I know him. But otherwise, I just wanted to, I try to pop in here at the end of these and just say thank you to everybody. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you guys for coming. I'm going to stop the broadcast now, and if you have more questions, we can keep chatting, or we can all go home. Well, I am home, but you know.